Hello my dear friends, you're in the MilitarySummary channel. On this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And we have significant number of very interesting details and updates, and probably the most important thing is that Syrsky, the commander-in-chief of Armed Forces of Ukraine, announced about complete evacuation and abandoning positions in Avdiivka itself. So the battle for Avdiivka has ended, at least the let's say the active phase. Now the main purpose of the Ukrainians is to evacuate as many as possible soldiers and to reduce as much as possible the losses of the forces. And of course, we might, and as you can see, I have adjusted the map. Now we show the just ninth quarter, the part of Ukraine control, probably the central part, eastern part, southern part, southeastern part currently are in the gray zone, and very difficult to understand where exactly we can find the Ukrainians. One can say that the battle for Avdiivka has ended, but we need to understand that this is not true. And maybe the battle for the physical borders of Avdiivka, of the stronghold of Avdiivka, has ended, and it's probably true. But when talking about the general situation, the battle for Avdiivka foothold has just started. And once again, to understand the future, to understand the, let's say, the things that are going to take place next, it's very important to compare the battle for Avdiivka with the battle for Bakhmut and Mariupol, because all these battles are almost the same things, but with a lot of differences. And when talking about Mariupol, the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian forces who appeared in the cauldron since the beginning of the battle, and by the end of the clashes there were no way to move for the Russians, because the next things that were laid in front of Russian were the Azov Sea, so it's like nowhere to move further, right? And when talking about Bakhmut, Wagner's, by the end of the war, by the end of the clashes, were so exhausted, so the Russians didn't have any possibilities to move further. We remember that at the final stages of the battle for Bakhmut, Wagner's were so exhausted, so the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation were forced to redeploy a regular army to the flanks to support Wagner's, who were storming the city in central part of the, let's say, of Bakhmut-Artyomovsk. And when talking about Avdiivka, the Russians managed to reduce the losses so much as that they managed to establish control over just of 10% of the stronghold, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back. The Russians did have losses, and they still continue having losses during the clashes, but of course in the Ukrainians, but we can say that the losses of Russian army and Ukrainian army are almost the same. And obviously the Russians will continue offensive operation, because we continue receiving a lot of updates from the line between Lastachkina and the Industrial Avenue. For example, the Russians, different mappers have already updated their maps, including Deep State, pro-Ukrainian one, and the Russians managed to improve their positions further along the tree lines, and currently this is approximately the Russian control and the Russian progress in this area. And of course, we understand that very likely the Russians will continue offensive operation, and according to information we have from the different Russian sources, there are very heavy clashes between Lastachkina and, let's say, Brivnost fortification, or the entrance to Avdiivka. So exactly the main clashes currently are taking place for these tree lines, for this one. But we received this update few hours ago, and very likely that as a result of clashes, the Russians have already managed to force the Ukrainians to step back. There are very heavy clashes, there are losses from both sides, a lot of wounded soldiers. The Russians have losses, the Ukrainians either have losses, and this update we received even yesterday at 10 p.m. So that was like update, let's say at the end of the 16th of February. And today, this morning, we got, let's say at 10 a.m. of the local time, we got update that very likely that this evening, upcoming evening of the 17th of February, the Russians will enter Lastachkina itself from the east. They will force the Ukrainians to step back, to be more precise, the forces or those that left from 3rd Assault Brigade. And after that, after the Russians entered Lastachkina, the Russians promised to start offensive operation and storming in direction of Severnaya. So Severnaya is the settlement that located to the north of Vadiana, this one. So the battle has just started, not for Avdiivka stronghold, because we understand that this is the game over, but about the foothold and the villages and settlements that located to the west of Avdiivka. And we're talking about Severnaya, Toninka, Lastachkina, Orlivka, Berdычи, Stepovo, Semenovka, and many other cities and settlements, including the chemical plant. When talking about chemical plant, the 3rd Azov Brigade published their own video of the situation on the ground ground. As you can see, most of the forces currently located below the surface, but the Russians are saying that it's a very big mistake from the Ukrainian side, because the Russians are not planning to storm the area. They're planning to bomb this area with FAP 1500 or even something heavier, and they're going to repeat the destiny and the story of Azovstal. So this territory will be bombed, obviously. Furthermore, the Russians reported that Ukrainians are trying to hold this territory like a chemical plant Lastishkin, and they will try to do this regarding the losses until Zelensky returns after his Western European trip. As you know, Zelensky yesterday have signed the security agreement with Germany, and today we got report that Zelensky, after Germany visited France, and they signed a security agreement with France as well. So maybe Zelensky will visit additional countries, will sign additional agreements, and when he returns back, probably the Ukrainians will get some, let's say, business plan or something like this to understand what are they going to do next. But let's return back to Avdiivka and let's talk about the central part. As you can see, the Russians continue clashes during the previous night. The Ukrainian sources and the Russian sources published significant number of videos of small groups of Ukrainians who were moving from one street to another, mainly from the eastern and the southern part to Avdiivka in direction of the 9th quarter, and after that from the 9th quarter to the fields, and from the fields to the villages like Orlovka, Lastishkina and Severna. On this video, for example, we can see the movements of 3rd Azov Brigade. This video was geolocated. This is the edge positions of 9th quarter, so we see the Ukrainians are running away, and we see that Ukrainians, as we discussed, were using small groups of 10-15 soldiers because to reduce not to attract the Russian artillery, Russian FPV drones. But according to information we have, starting this morning, the Ukrainians, understanding the situation after they received an order to start withdrawing and abandoning positions, they start creating bigger groups of 30-40 soldiers, and obviously after the Ukrainians announced about the evacuation, the Russians understand that they need everything they can, they need everything they must, but they will attack the fields and they will force the Ukrainians to stop and not to move further. According to information we have, just during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, during the process of evacuation, the Ukrainians managed to evacuate a few, let's say, hundreds of soldiers, but also the Russians reported that few hundreds of soldiers were left and abandoned in the fields. They basically were destroyed as a result of Russian artillery fire, of FAP fire, and of course of cluster rounds fire. Furthermore, we start receiving significant number of videos and details about prisoners of war from Avdiivka, lots of videos from different directions. For example, the Russians are saying that during the previous night, to stabilize the front line, or at least to slow down the Russians, the Ukrainians made another attempt to counterattack the Russians from the 9th quarter in direction of the railway station. That was like a counterattack of 3rd Assault Brigade, of 3rd company of that brigade, but they were completely defeated, and the entire platoon was destroyed. There were just 20 soldiers left, less than 20 soldiers left, and after even campaign was destroyed, and after that the Russians published the video of captured officers, let's say the lieutenant of that campaign. There was investigations, he was asked questions where the Ukrainian positions and so on. Little bit to the east we got another video of another Ukrainian brigade. It was like a mix of different brigades. The Russians published the video of captured soldiers of 110th Brigade and Presidential Brigades. They were very afraid of course, the situation, but they also provided a lot of information about the situation on the ground. And so lots of updates about different prisoners of war, about the evacuation. We received a lot of videos where the Ukrainians were asking for evacuation, those who were abandoned, the wounded one. And let's say also during the night we got a very interesting opinion, and I completely agree with this opinion, that it's very probable that Syrskyi didn't announce the withdrawal willingly, but was forced after seeing that Ukrainians were refusing to follow orders and start abandoning their positions in panic. So that was not like the things that came from the top. That was the situation that the Ukrainians took a decision to do by themselves, to surrender and to run away and to run for their lives, because nobody was planning to let's say evacuate them or gave any support or something like this. So the situation is getting worse, and probably 17th of February is going to be the last day of battle for Avdiivka. Those who managed to evacuate during the night was the last, let's say, number of Ukrainian soldiers. The rest who's still in Avdiivka will be encircled and captured by the Russians, and they will surrender. Obviously, most of them at least will surrender. Once again, the physical battle for Avdiivka itself has ended. Very likely, few things we're going to receive about the Azovstal, but currently the Russians are planning to move further. Once again, according to some Russian sources, this evening we can expect the entrance inside of Lastachkina and the beginning of storming operation of Severna, and then everything will start from the beginning. But the main problem is that Ukrainian forces are exhausted. There is no prepared defense belts. The Russians have complete superiority in FPV drones, artillery and aviation bomb, and to tell the truth, I can't even tell you where exactly the Ukrainians are able to stop the Russians. I can't tell you. Now we're moving to the south. The Russians continue progress in the vicinity of Nivoysk, and according to different mappers, the Russians managed to establish control over additional fields and to get closer to the village Nivoyska itself. And according to some mappers, this is the current situation on this area. And now we're moving further to the south, to Novomikhailivka direction. As we discussed yesterday, we received some videos from this territory. Another video with prisoners of war who was captured as a result of clashes was 155th Brigade of Russian Army. And today we got additional confirmation of Russian progress in this area, and we have the video of Russian storming operation of the northern farms now to the north of Novomikhailivka. On this video we can see the Russian stormtroopers clearing the trenches, and after that they start bombing and attacking some building farms, and after that the Russians started ground operation. So this video was geolocated. Very likely all these events took place somewhere here, and as you can see, according to Russian offensive operation, they managed to establish control over the building, clear it and capture it. So this video was published by the Ministry of Defense, so very likely that today we're going to receive more updates, and very likely we will adjust the map and to show the northern progress of Russian army or something like this. So obviously we see that the situation in this area is worsening for the Ukrainians as well. So we are waiting for today. Today we're going to receive a lot of updates, and obviously these updates can't be predicted by anybody. And another important thing that I'll remind you that just yesterday we were talking about complaints of 35th Brigade in the vicinity of Krynki, where the Ukrainians were complaining on their poor positions and poor situation on the ground, that there are lots of suicide cases among the personnel and so on. And today we received another video of complaints, but as I understand, from the forces of 19th Brigade. This brigade used to be located in Sever's direction, and they were saying the same, that we are tired, we're exhausted, we don't want to fight. And these guys from Ukrainian brigade were suggested the Ukrainian army to surrender and to stop this war and to go home. So the riot is about to start in Ukrainian army. Maybe it's already this process has already started, and maybe this is the reason why Zelensky was removed from Ukraine, as I told you, because this is too dangerous to continue keeping him on the territory of Ukraine. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.